Picture this. It's the early 1960s, and you're in a middle school gym class. There are these two 12-year-old boys. One is in the middle of a heated argument with the gym teacher about running a 7-minute mile. The other? Well, he's struggling so much that he literally faints. Now their peers, absolutely ruthless, label them as the slowest, fattest kids in the class. But here is the incredible part. That shared childhood humiliation, it sparked a friendship that didn't just survive middle school, it went on to forge a massive, multi-million-dollar business empire that fundamentally rewrote the rules of corporate America.
So you really have to wonder, how exactly do two struggling friends with absolutely zero business background build a brand that eventually sells for a staggering $326 million? Well, in this explainer, we're going to unpack exactly how they transformed massive personal and financial limitations into a completely unconventional business phenomenon.
Section 1. The Accidental Ice Cream Makers. Okay, let's dive right into this, because the wildest part of this whole story is that neither founder actually wanted to make ice cream in the first place. Going into business together was honestly a last resort. By 1973, life wasn't looking great for either of them. You had Jerry, who dreamed of being a doctor, but got rejected by over 40 medical schools. He ended up working as a lab tech, literally mashing cow hearts into test tubes. Then you had Ben. He hated corporate authority, was working as a janitor at McDonald's, and tried to make a living selling pottery, but, well, nobody was buying it. It was desperation that finally drove Jerry to move to New York with Ben just to brainstorm some kind of way out. They both love food, so they figured, hey, let's look for a culinary escape.
Now, their very first idea? Making fresh bagels. Sounds great, right? But that dream was instantly crushed by a $40,000 price tag just for the essential bagel-making equipment. They had practically nothing to their names, so that massive financial barrier forced a total pivot.
So from a $40,000 barrier, they pivoted to ice cream. And how did they learn to make it? By splitting the cost of a wildly cheap $5 correspondence course from Penn State. That $5 investment was literally all the formal training they had to launch what would eventually become a global empire. Armed with a $4,000 bank loan and their own meager savings, their beginnings in 1978 were, to put it mildly, scrappy. They definitely couldn't afford a pristine storefront. Instead, they rented an abandoned gas station in Vermont. It had a collapsed roof and 4 inches of solid ice covering the floor. To keep their costs down, they actually built their own work tables out of the absolute cheapest scrap lumber they could find. Oh, and Ben's field pottery business? It actually came in handy. They served their very first customers using his unsold bowls and dishes.
Section 2. Building a brand on chunks. Now, what's really interesting about this part of the story is that it wasn't just their location that was unconventional. Their physical limitations birthed an entirely new style of product. Ben suffers from anosmia. That means he has almost no sense of smell and a severely diminished sense of taste. In the food industry, that sounds like a complete death sentence, but surprisingly, this exact condition became their company's biggest superpower. Leaning on his biochemistry background, Jerry engineered the ice cream strictly to satisfy Ben's unique sensory needs. It came down to a specific process. Step 1, they had to rely heavily on mouthfeel and texture. Step 2, they packed in double quantities of massive fruit and chocolate chunks. And Step 3, the ultimate quality control. Absolutely no batch was approved unless Ben could accurately identify the flavor while wearing a blindfold. That unique process, born purely out of a medical limitation, created the ultra-premium, ultra-chunky style that ended up defining their entire brand identity.
So they were fantastic in making ice cream, right? But they were terrible at business. I mean, they built amazing community loyalty with wild events, like literally smashing cinder blocks on Ben's stomach, but behind the scenes, they were bleeding cash. At one point, they even hung a sign on their door saying they were closed for the day, just so they could figure out if they were actually making any money. They finally realized their habit of over-scooping portions was completely destroying their profit margins. To survive, they had to pivot. They moved from just retail scooping to packing their ice cream into wholesale pints to sell directly to grocery stores. Section 3. David versus the Doughboy.
But as they entered that wholesale market in 1984, they walked right into the crosshairs of a massive corporate giant. On one side, you have Ben & Jerry's with about $1.8 million in sales. On the other side, Häagen-Dazs, backed by the absolute corporate titan, Pillsbury, commanding a 70% market share. Pillsbury saw the young company as a threat and issued a monopolistic ultimatum to all their distributors: drop Ben & Jerry's or you lose Häagen-Dazs entirely. For distributors, it was a pretty easy choice to side with the giant. Overnight, Ben & Jerry were completely cut off from their supply chain. Now, they definitely couldn't afford to fight Pillsbury in a traditional courtroom, so they took the battle directly to the court of public opinion. They came up with this brilliant guerrilla marketing slogan, "What's the Doughboy afraid of?" It perfectly framed the massive corporation as a bully trying to restrict consumer choice. And they launched an all-out grassroots war. They bought ads in Rolling Stone magazine, they plastered posters all across the country, they even set up a dedicated 800-number hotline. When customers called in, they were given all the details and actively encouraged to contact Pillsbury directly to complain. And the public backlash was immense. The pressure actually forced Pillsbury to back down, and distributors started stocking Ben & Jerry's again. It was an absolute masterclass in grassroots survival.
Section 4. Rewriting the business rules.
Surviving the Doughboy meant their sales absolutely skyrocketed. But, ironically, this intense period of growth almost killed the company's spirit. You see, they hated the corporate world, and the immense stress of scaling up had them seriously considering selling out completely. That is, until they heard a piece of advice that changed everything. If there's something you don't like about business, change it. So instead of walking away, they decided to stay. They were going to weaponize their own corporate structure and use it as a force for community good.
They implemented some highly specific, completely unorthodox mechanics. Let's break them down. First, executive pay. They capped the highest earner's salary at a maximum of 5 times that of the lowest paid worker. Second, charity. They established a foundation funded by a mandatory 7.5% of their annual pre-tax profits. And third, when they desperately needed $25 million to build a new factory, they completely ignored Wall Street. They went public, sure, but they restricted stock sales strictly to Vermont residents. Wall Street experts called it incredibly naive, but it worked perfectly. It turned their most loyal local customers into actual, literal owners.
And this brilliantly illustrates how that community-first approach played out financially. It was explosive. Revenue jumped from $1.8 million in '83 to $4 million in '84, straight up to $32 million by 1988. And this growth was constantly fueled by unconventional publicity stunts. Take their Cowmobile tour, for example. They drove a modified mobile home across the U.S., handing out free ice cream, literally sleeping on mattresses strapped to the top of the freezer. Their grassroots, rebellious methods were undeniably driving massive corporate scale.
Section 5. The Unilever Bio.
But scaling up takes a toll. Behind the scenes, operations were seriously straining. Factory workers were pulling exhausting 12-hour shifts, and costs were spiraling out of control. Ben & Jerry decided to step back. They hired a corporate CEO and then watched their stock price eventually drop by 50%. Fast forward to the year 2000. The multinational conglomerate Unilever puts a staggering number on the table, $326 million. Now, because Ben & Jerry's was a publicly traded company, the board of directors had a fiduciary duty to their shareholders. Legally, they felt they simply could not refuse an offer that high. The sale caused massive public backlash. Fans accused the founders of selling out. The stress of all this was so severe that Ben actually underwent an emergency quintuple bypass heart surgery shortly after.
But here is the critical detail. The founders didn't just take the money and walk away quietly. They structurally guaranteed their brand's activist identity post-acquisition. They forced a very specific clause into the Unilever deal, the creation of an independent board of directors. Their argument for this was purely economic. They argued that the brand's high valuation was directly tied to its social justice mission. If Unilever were to dilute that mission, well, they would devalue their own $326 million asset. And this is exactly why Ben & Jerry's continues to operate so differently from standard corporate entities today. Look at their public stances, from enforcing fair trade ingredient sourcing, to funding climate action initiatives, to launching explicitly political flavors like Hubby Hubby. These are not just standard marketing stunts. Regardless of where you fall in a political spectrum, as an observer, you have to look at these initiatives as factual, structural mechanics of their unique business model, all protected by that original independent board clause.
Which leaves us with a really striking final question to think about. Can you truly balance massive corporate scale with grassroots social ideals, or does every rebel eventually get bought? Two kids who failed gym class built a $326 million empire by doing pretty much everything wrong according to traditional business textbooks. They revolutionized product design out of a medical necessity, and they weaponized their corporate structure for local good. But as they scale inside a massive global conglomerate today, it forces us to ask, what is the true legacy of Ben & Jerry? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you in the next one.